This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
.07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. Time for Ask a Rabbi.
Good morning, and this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chaim, your renewal reform congregation in Port St. Lucie, where Judaism is fun, enjoyable, educational, and a whole lot of other really good things. So, welcome to our show this morning. And I'm kind of excited this weekend. We've got one of our B'nai Mitzvah, which is a young person coming of age and taking their place in the community. There used to be an old joke about today I'm a fountain pen, and because fountain pens were often given to older children who could manage it without blotting and splotching and doing all those things. So it was a sign of maturity. Not quite what we do today, and he certainly has his own iPad and all those other wonderful things that kids today have. It's a young man named Ryan, and we're so looking forward to him demonstrating to himself and to the community that he has what it takes to be a responsible member of the community. And that's always been one of my favorite things. It's interesting that I used to do more of them in the past than I've done recently. Our new congregation doesn't have that many kids, and Port St. Lucie's actually a little bit older. Yeah, it's a yet. I know there's a row coming up right behind Ryan. They seem to come in waves, and I think that's true in most congregations. It was true in my previous congregations, and it's true with Congregation Eitz Chaim. So my plan was to talk a little bit about what does it mean for a young person to take their place in a community. What does it mean to celebrate becoming a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah? They don't get bar mitzvahed. They don't get bat mitzvahed. They become a
I've said that.
Bar. A lot of people do. But they become a bar or bat mitzvah.
Guilty as charged.
And right, so
you too?
Oh yeah, he uses it as a verb all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's not. It's a noun. It's like saying I got lawyered. You know.
Well, you do get lawyered up.
Okay. You celebrate your becoming a bar or bat mitzvah, and that's what they get to do. And as part of that process, it's a rite of passage. And, I always joke with the parents because they stress out even more than the kids do. But part of that's because they're involved with a whole lot of extra things, like worrying about family and parties and all of the trimmings, if you will, of what's going on. Whereas the child is simply worried about acquiring the needed skills, knowledge, and demonstrating it. And writing those speeches and all of that. That was the stress this week was, can I write those speeches that I need to write? And it's like they don't have to be Gettysburg
Wait a minute, they waited all the way to this week?
Yeah, that's not uncommon.
The last minute?
Well, I guess part of it depended on the congregation too. I let them pick and choose. There's milestones as to what they have to have done by a certain date, and every once in a while, somebody gets postponed because they've missed the deadlines, and
so these deadlines, I take it, are very strict.
Give or take a few days, yeah. If you haven't hit a milestone, and I don't see seriousness to get caught up, you're going to be in a world of hurt. It's more than just writing a 5-minute speech the day or the week before the event. That realistically a 13-year-old can do. Right? But they can't suddenly learn Hebrew and how to chant it and all of that. So yeah, you know, they've got to be able to decode the Hebrew at a certain point, and then they need to be able to chant it. Then they need to be able to do all of that without the vowels and without the notes present. So they have to have learned it well enough to be able to actually do it using the Torah cues, the cues that are in Torah itself. And that's another set of skills. And then I take it one step further for those that are willing to. Not every student does it. It's optional. And that's to join what we call the Yad Squad. The Yad Squad are people who have enough skill that if I'm not in town or for whatever reason I don't read Torah on a given week, they could step in and do it. You know, give them a week or two warning, and if they keep their skills up, they should be able to do that. And, so Ryan's doing that. He's translating the section. He understands very fully what his Torah portion says and what it means. Now, when I say translate, I do not mean that they speak biblical Hebrew. I do not mean that they speak modern Hebrew. I'm talking about they've wrestled enough with the vocabulary and the grammar within the few sentences that they're going to say. The average bar bat mitzvah recites somewhere between 20 and 30 verses. 25 is required if you're going to Yad Squad. But somewhere between 25 and 30 is a typical amount of Torah to do. And that's partially because there are 8 of what we call aliyot. And aliyah is where somebody is called to the Torah, says the blessings, and that's typically divvied up in the family. And there's 8 of those, so 8 times, and 3 is the minimum length for one of those. So, 8 times 3 plus 1 is 25. That's where the 25 comes from.
Do you ever run into a child that, where the parents really want this and the child is not exactly into it?
Yeah. Or the grandparent really wants it.
Oh, I never even thought about the grandparent.
The grandparents very often are the movers, if you will. Well, yes and no, because unfortunately in today's environment, a lot of parents don't get it that they are supposed to push. They're supposed to push the kid through the bar bat mitzvah because that's the whole point of it. Right? The kid is not mature enough until after the event to know how to push themselves.
Okay, I got to ask this question because I know a lot of situations where mixed marriages.
Yep.
You got a Christian on one side and Jewish
on the other side, and they have to decide. Well, hopefully they will have decided long before they get to the bar bat mitzvah whether or not they're going to raise the child Jewish. There's a huge difference between raising a child Jewish and raising a child Christian. There is and there isn't, right? It's one God, but it's a very different approach to that God. Mm-hmm. And there's an amount of training and a worldview that comes with declaring yourself Jewish and living a Jewish life. And hopefully in marriages that have both faiths represented, the parents have been, have thought ahead enough to not have the kid be a point of argument over how they're going to raise the child. Right, and have enough respect to say, you and mommy are Jewish, or you and daddy are Jewish, and the other parent's religion is respected. That's the healthy approach, right? Because you can't both believe and not believe.
Mm-hmm. No, I got you.
And, you can't either. Somewhere you've got to hit the fork in the road, and you either go right or left, or you go off in some other direction, which is. And sometimes they go parallel, or not parallel, perpendicular rather. But, so if you're raising the kid Jewish, then hopefully the non-Jewish parent is supporting it. And, I will say that we have a tradition when we do a bar bat mitzvah that the Torah is taken when the child is getting ready to actually do the Torah service. We take the Torah out of the ark and we hand it to the oldest family member. And then it goes through every family member. And then finally the parent puts it on the child. puts it in place on the child.
That's a very moving ceremony.
It is a very moving ceremony, and that ceremony goes through a non-Jewish parent if they're there. Right. So
Interesting. Wow.
Well, because very often when I've dealt with mixed families, the non-Jewish parent might be the one who's got the more flexible schedule. So they're the ones who are going to bring the kid for training. They're the ones who are going to, do a lion's share of the work, because you never know in a family who's got what kind of schedule.
Sure.
And so very often I deal more with the non-Jewish parent than I might with the Jewish parent, depending on the family. So, and it looks like somebody has called in. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Woo, okay. And somebody has taken advantage of 772-340-1590. That is Bob in PSL. Thank you for calling, Bob.
Good morning, Rabbi. I was under the impression, I grew up around all kinds of religions, all kinds of people, and I was under the impression that if mom was Jewish, then it was automatic that the kid was going to be raised Jewish. It didn't matter what dad was.
That's so the Orthodox view is if the birthing mother, and with surrogate parents that becomes even more important. If the birthing mother, if the womb that carried the child was Jewish, then the child is Jewish. It doesn't matter who donated the egg or the sperm, it's who wombed and delivered the child. Right, because it became a different issue with in vitro. Back when that rule was first made.
Come on.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it for a minute, the idea is that if the person who's carrying the child is living a Jewish life, then the kid is started into it. And there's some evidence that says that kids have a preference for the languages that they hear while they're in the womb. They have a preference for the foods that mom ate while they were in the womb. And that's true for me. I love Chinese and Thai food, and that's what my mother ate a lot of while she was carrying me.
Really?
Yeah.
That's I've never heard that before.
Yeah, no,
wow.
there is some scientific evidence. It says we pre-acclimate the fetus.
Then I must be the exception to the rule then, because my mom, you couldn't get my mom to eat spicy food, and I absolutely love it.
Okay, well, every predisposition comes with things that you learn and do otherwise. It doesn't mean that you won't. It just means that there's a tendency in that direction. So, it may not be spicy food. It may be whether or not you like chicken or pork or shellfish or cod or things like that. So,
right.
And may not have to do with the actual spices that you put on it. Although I will admit that I like Chinese spices that are in Chinese food.
Okay.
So Bob, the answer is the idea of if the mother is Jewish, that the child is automatically Jewish. That's an Orthodox concept, and of course our congregation is Reform. Reform says that either parent being Jewish and the child being raised openly as Jewish qualifies as Jewish, and that's called patrilineal descent. And yes, it's actually one of the bones of contention, if you will, between Orthodox and Reform, and it's a question because Torah doesn't say. In fact, Torah, if anything, implies that if the father is Jewish, the child is Jewish. But it also allows for the woman being Jewish and the child being Jewish. So there's certainly enough Torah indications that it can go either way.
What's the conservative perspective?
Conservative will follow the Orthodox much more closely. And, right, because they're kind of, we would like to do the halakha, but we only do it for certain things. Mostly dietary and Shabbat. Although a lot of conservative congregations will use electricity, and now even they are starting to stream. So, right, what is acceptable and not acceptable changes. it's common for any Orthodox, and this includes Christian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, any Orthodox tradition within any religion will tell you that they never change, that they practice it the way that it always has been practiced. And the reality is that they do change. They just change more slowly. Sometimes they change more rigorously. Sometimes they change less rigorously. And, Orthodox means correct thinkers, right thinkers. Far right, far right might, religiously right. But it's, so they do change. They change more slowly. For example, Orthodox congregations now are starting to be served by women rabbis, and the Orthodox are starting to ordain women rabbis. And a gay rabbi was just, an openly gay rabbi was just ordained in an Orthodox yeshiva in Israel. So, things move. They just move more slowly. And part of that is actually, this is almost kind of fascinating. I just got my dissertation in the mail, and a big part of my dissertation is on something called religious signaling. And it talks about how religious organizations handle change from social pressures and how they do it and still are viewed as authentic. And it's something called religious signaling. And
okay.
my study is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's fairly, I think it's a new part of signaling theory. My chair argues with me and tells me it's cognitive dissonance. And he's right in that for the individual, it's a cognitive dissonance adjustment. But it is stimulated by religious signaling, which is part of signal theory. Signal theory is why a peacock has a big tail. Right? The point of the big tail is that the male peacock is saying, hey, I'm so strong and virile, I can afford to have this big hunking tail off my rear end that, makes it difficult for me to fly, makes it, difficult, makes me the guy everybody picks fights with, but hey, it means my sperm are really what you want. Hopefully humans don't always act like peacocks, but
well, I've seen a few, but that's
I understand.
all right.
I understand completely. Right, but
I am from L.A.
Yeah, I hear you. But that's signaling theory that allows. That's why male birds have more elegant plumage and brighter colors. Is they're trying to, they're showing that they are strong enough and virile enough to be taking the risk of being knocked off. Right, being not hiding and being obvious, that shows you that their sperm is so good. So strong, and that's why we use the word cocky for things like that, right? Because it's a peacock or a rooster cock. There's a reason why it has that phrase. So I probably have gone all over the tree with you, Bob, but the answer is yes. And for the Orthodox and older congregations, if the mother was Jewish, it was certainly much easier for the child to be considered Jewish. But not every child where the mother is Jewish is raised to be Jewish. Right? Sometimes dad, or whichever. Every family has different dynamics, and you've got a constant power play between mother and father and child, especially if you've got differences. Not everybody's able to handle that maturely. So did that answer your question, Bob? I think I went I went all over Florida with that one, but
yeah, you kind of did, but I get it. Thanks,
okay.
Rabbi.
No problem. Thank you for calling, Bob. Appreciate it. And if anybody else would like to call in with a question, maybe about bar bat mitzvah or what is a Jew today? 772-340-1590. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chaim, and this is Ask a Rabbi. So
I still can't believe you brought in vitro into this thing.
Well, in vitro is it's a new technology.
Yeah. Oh, I'm well aware of it. Yeah.
But I can understand where the older tradition of the birthing womb comes from, because that child will have been rhythmed into a Jewish rhythm. In other words, if the birthing mother is Jewish and observant, then she will do Shabbat every week. So you have this energy shift. And I can talk about that because people tell me that I have it, that I'm different. Come Friday afternoon, after decades of doing this, my body changes energy pattern coming into Shabbat, and it stays at this different plateau through Saturday, and then comes back up to its normal high energy on Sunday. And I've even had people say that, if they talk to me on the phone, they can detect the energy difference. That it's that significant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, given that, and the people who know me, who are and who are not Jewish, both have commented about that. That you're in Saturday mode or you're in Shabbat mode. And I do things on Saturday, not a lot. Most often I come home from services and I will take a nap. I won't be lucky enough to do that this weekend, but it's something to do with the festivities. So I'll be mucho tired come Saturday night because I'll be boosting the energy up to a level that it's not used to. Saturday's my recovery day, and I do use that. So, yeah.
Intriguing.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that that's part of it, right? That if the birthing mother has that rhythm, then she's pre-programming is not the right word, but pre-acclimating a child to the idea that you have this one day a week that you chill out and you do it differently.
Okay. I keep going back to the vitro thing.
Yeah.
Do your congregations, if there is a situation like this with a family, can they arrange for someone of Jewish faith to carry this child?
Sometimes Jewish families will look for a Jewish surrogate for that reason.
That's
for that
interesting.
reason.
Wow.
Yeah. And there are Jewish surrogate mothers. Right.
Okay.
But the whole surrogate mother thing is raises up so many issues, and I don't know if you've ever looked at anything like that, Stuart.
There'd be a million red flags in that,
well,
I would think.
there's
We never looked at that, but we did in vitro.
If you use a surrogate mother, then very often people will put down restrictions on her, like no alcohol, no this, no that, right, while she's carrying the child, because,
that seems common sense with anybody.
Well, yeah, it should be, right? Teratogens are serious things that harm the baby, and there are just so many that do it for different trimesters. I teach development, and yeah, it doesn't take a lot to mess with a kid. Look at all the thalidomide babies.
Yeah.
Right, and there's a whole bunch of different things that were not supposed to be a problem. And was it thalidomide? You only had to take it once, and if you happen to hit it at just the right time.
Carol did so many of those stories when she was a medical reporter.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So we're learning so much more about alcohol, smoking, and all of those things and what they do to the unborn child. And even if your partner smokes, right? Secondhand smoke, really a significant issue. So there are so many things that go into it, and that's probably what the rabbis had a gut sense of when they set the rules down, even before they really thought about in vitro and surrogate mothering. They just thought about, what's the womb that's carrying that child? Right. And that's become the overriding piece. And, so yeah, it's kind of interesting. Now, if you've got any question, right, the easy thing to do, and I've done this with classes. You take the whole class, you take them to the mikveh, and the ones who need it for conversion, you just do it. and then there's no question about who, what, where, and there can be no arguments. And we had a situation in Tucson where for a little while we were combining efforts with a conservative congregation. And we had combined schooling, we had combined this and combined that. And the first question they raised was, what about your patrilineal children? I said, well, I'm going to take the whole class to the mikveh. I said there won't be, and they just, they understood. You get permission from the parents to make that a conversion for any child for whom there's any question. And it's not embarrassing to the kid because everybody does it. Everybody goes through it. And so they're not singled out as being, quote unquote, less Jewish. Right? It's just they have this little extra piece of paper that their parents take care of. And you don't even need really permission because it's done before they're 13. So they've not yet achieved the age of majority, right? So it's done on parental consent, which is, there's not a court, a Jewish court that denies that. If the parents say, I want my child to be Jewish, then it's a slam dunk, if you will. Really bad phrase for a mikveh, but...
Who is on a Jewish court? Rabbis?
Yes, rabbis. Ideally,
Oh.
3 rabbis.
Really?
It can be scholars.
It's kind of like an appellate court.
Yeah.
In a
Well,
way.
yeah. It's a court of 3, and that's the smallest bet din, and because you have to be able to have dissenting opinion, and you need to have 2 over 1, right? And that's kind of interesting because I'm doing an additional course of study right now through my seminary, which is Dayan judge work, very specifically. And there's a whole section of Talmud that talks about what are the things that are brought to a court of 3. What's to a court of 3, what's to a court of 23, all the way up to the court of 70, yeah.
Well, now, wait a minute. Where in the world would that be held?
In the old days, it's what they did. They had really large courts, depending on if it was a capital crime. Right. If it was a capital crime, you had to have 70. It was not just 12.
Little unwieldy, I would say.
Yes, I'm sure it was, and I'm sure that was not an accident. Oh, it's to make it very hard.
So then where were the civic courts when you had this?
If you had a financial dispute, it probably was handled by a court of 3.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So, there's this, you only use the big court when you need it. Most of the time you're in a small court. And, and you could appeal things and they had quite a judicial system. And the system then, as we would like to have the American system, was geared that it was better to let an innocent person, let a guilty person rather go free than to convict a guilty person. Right? They would rather make that the error of allowing a guilty person to go free than of incarcerating or executing an innocent person.
Sure.
Right? Because that's considered so bad. Would that we did not have a 4% innocent conviction rate in the U.S., which just blows my mind. But that's a whole nother story.
I was going to say.
Yeah, we'll don't
want to open that can of worms.
We'll get into.
We did that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's that's pretty sad. So getting back to a more cheerful thing, bar and bat mitzvah.
Yes. Yeah. Circumventing.
Right. Yeah,
around
circumventing
the world.
all the way back around. So one of the blessings that a bar or bat mitzvah and his or her parents say is, "Thank you, God, for keeping me alive." And I always tell them that that blessing's going to be said, and there's a reason. And because the average bar or bat mitzvah will have a number of meltdowns on the way. And
I mean, like where they go in front of security cameras in the house and finger.
well, that's a mild way in some ways.
So how long is this period of study getting up to this day?
The intense part of it's about 6 months. But of course there's a whole lot before that, which is being able to decode the Hebrew. And, so a couple of years is because you have to get to know Judaism, and you need to know the cycle of things and a lot of other stuff that isn't covered in the specifics of this is your portion, and this is how you do this part of the service, and this is how you lead that, and this is the energy behind that, and this is why we do this. And, they learn a lot of the mechanics behind leading a service. Because leading a service is not just, let me go stand up in front of a bunch of people and recite this prayer. there's a whole lot more to that. First of all, there's a ton of choreography of move here, do this, bow, don't bow, look up, don't bow, just knowing when to do what. And then there's an energy path through the service where the idea is that you take everybody who comes in, and through working through the prayers and the singing and everything else, people leave at a higher spiritual level than they came in.
Mm-hmm.
And
makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and that is not an accident. It's not just a concert. It's not just a bunch of happy music. If it's done right, then it flows just very naturally. And people, if they pay attention at all, realize that they start to leave in a better place than they came in. And there's a science to doing that, a liturgical science. And the B'nai Mitzvah learn some of that and some of the whys. Now, when they go through a confirmation, they actually get to design a service, and that's taking it to the next level, and that's really learning about why we do what we do when we do it. The order of the service has been the way it is for at least 1,000 years, and that's not an accident. That pattern does something. And the more you experiment with it, the more you realize, it needs to flow in a certain way. The service just needs to move up and up and up and then come back down, because if you stay up at the top of the mountain, you can't drive your car home. Right. So there's a...
Do you ever find a kid that is so inspired that they may want to become a rabbi?
Yeah. And I tell them live with that for 6 or 7 years and then let's talk about it.
So there's like no... Like in the Catholic Church, for instance, what they used to do at least is have seminaries going all the way down to high school that somebody would join and then
get them on the path.
Yeah.
Certainly some, what I like to see with a Jewish kid is that they'll go to camp. They'll go to a Jewish camp, and if there was more of a day school somewhere around, that would be wonderful. Doesn't have to be. They need to stay engaged.
Like a regular Hebrew school, or no?
Well, a day school is a regular school.
Okay, yeah.
It teaches the math, history, and all that stuff, but it adds on a couple of hours of Hebrew and Jewish training, like a Catholic school would.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a longer day for the kids. It's a bigger commitment. The nearest one for us is down in West Palm, not surprisingly. It takes usually much more of a Jewish density than what we've got. There was one in Tucson called
Would
Tucson
that be a
Hebrew
boarding
Academy.
school? Or?
No. There's
No?
there was until Tuesday of this week. Yeah, one Jewish boarding school in the U.S., and it was in North Carolina. It closed its doors. It announced closing its doors on Tuesday of this week due to lack of funding, is what they cited. They said that, when it ends in June, they're done. So, a bunch of teachers who thought they had jobs come fall don't.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that was the only Jewish boarding school.
So that would be similar to a seminary then, if you will.
No.
No? Just-
Seminary is post-college.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's a graduate school. A real accredited rabbinical school requires that you have a bachelor's before you even walk in the door. So,
Isn't the preference for studying for a bar mitzvah not just the 6 months or the year, but sort of like 5 years of Hebrew school? Isn't that what begins to prepare you for those 6 months or that last year?
I don't think the average kid today gets 5 years before. I don't think the average one does. They might get Sunday school, but they're not going to get Hebrew school.
Meaning you mean during the week?
Yeah. They might color an aleph, or they might color a bet. They might color the letters, and they might, get 3 or 4 words, but they're not going to get what I would call a Hebrew education in a Sunday school setting. They're not ready.
Well, in L.A., we had regular Hebrew schools.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ironic, but they wound up coming to Loyola University with us, 75% of my class is Jewish.
Yeah.
Back in my day, I went 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Twice during the week and
There
once
you
on
go.
Sunday.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. It was common to go either Monday and Wednesday or Tuesday and and Thursday. And today you're lucky if you can get the kids 1 day a week during the week, just because you're competing against baseball and soccer and little league, all the other things that kids can do. So it's hard to get a commitment from parents to bring a kid twice a week. And schools have discovered that it's so easy to not be Jewish anymore that they had to make it easier to be Jewish. It's the bottom line. They had to, and I work it one-on-one with families because it's a whole lot easier. We still get together for kid activities, but a lot of the instruction is private. Now, the Sunday part of that, right, the weekend part, that's more culture, history, and that sort of thing than it is the Hebrew language. That's just a sign of the times. It's when the group is together is a good time to go over holidays, and maybe you'll have the kids do a craft connected to the holiday or an activity or something. It's hard to call building a sukkah as quite a craft, but it's definitely a hands-on activity. And we've done some really wonderful things with our kids. We've had them make things for babies. We've had them make blessing walls and religious objects at different times.
Well, I have to say, if I didn't go 3 times a week, I don't think a lot of the memories I have, a lot of the recollection of prayers and songs that are ingrained in me would be ingrained in me.
That's probably true. Because that's where you got that. It's one of the reasons why I require attendance at services, so that some of that becomes ingrained. And if you want to test that, look at Sammy. Sammy sings songs, right, that Zach learned when he was training. And Lexi now sings things that she's learned while Ryan has been training. Because the kids that come along can't help but get some of it. When you start to come to services, it changes the learning. It just dramatically changes it, and that's why it's required. Because, when you did it in twice a week, you didn't go Friday and Saturday.
No.
Right, so that was the only place you were going to get. And you basically got the weekday service instead of the Shabbat service. Because that's what would have been done, especially at an Orthodox. They'd have done the weekday service.
But our classes were set up sort of like public school. I mean, we had reading, we had writing, we had Hebrew, we had, holidays. We actually had classes, and we got a report card every marking period, in all the classes.
But you probably had the Hebrew on the weekdays and the other stuff on the Sunday.
Probably.
But because that was just the format, and I've been a religious school teacher much longer than I've been a rabbi. I actually helped 10 women go through adult bat mitzvah long before I was a rabbi. Many years ago in Pittsburgh, back when it was not common, and
so adults can
go through it. Yeah, I've had a number of adults. And if there's any adult that's listening here that is interested, we are forming a class for adults to get ready for a bar and bat mitzvah. It's a unit of training for them. It's a unit of learning. And particularly for anybody who may not have had it as a child for one reason or another, many times they want to do it later on. And so we accommodate that. And
would you recommend that to converts into Judaism?
Yeah. I think it feels appropriate for them. It helps them with their Jewish identity. And, and then they have memories of bar and bat mitzvah that they can, when others are reminiscing, they'll have those anchors as well. So it's an important touchstone. It's an important time.
Seems more complicated than, say, a confirmation process.
It
on
is.
the
It
other
is
side.
much more complicated. We do a confirmation too, but there are kids in Port St. Lucie who are graduating high school that still know how to read Torah because they learned with me. Right? But they also picked up other things. They picked up public speaking. They learned how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They learned a whole variety of skills that they'll use the rest of their lives. And I can't tell you, I every once in a while I've got them on my phone, messages from mothers saying, hey, I didn't realize it at the time, but thank you for helping my child be a better high school student, a better college student, because those skills are in there. And which ones of them will become rabbis down the road, I don't know. Some of them have become more orthodox on me. That always surprises me too, but it happens. Yeah. Yeah. One of my first ones when I became a student rabbi that I worked with, she became very orthodox. She went to Stern in New York, and kind of interesting.
But the orthodoxy isn't all that much different than you, is it?
Can be. It can be. It'd be very, very hard to be Orthodox in Port St. Lucie or Fort Pierce, because there just is not the structure to support it.
Okay.
They have to be within walking distance of the temple.
That's
You know,
right.
they've got to have easier access to kosher food than what we've got. Can they do it? Yes. Is it easy? Heck no. It's much easier to be Orthodox in a larger Jewish community. So you're going to see a lot more when you get down toward West Palm, Fort Lauderdale, and those places. You're going to see much, much larger Orthodox communities than Port St. Lucie could ever hope to support.
And it's so spread out here that
Yeah. Walking up Peacock is probably not a good plan.
Not advisable. Yes.
Walking on University, not so bad. Peacock, walk past the shopping centers, no, just not likely. And, so a lot of life skills are imparted to the child in the course of this training. I can't tell you how many kids, when they first come in, you can barely hear them.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And by the time they get to where Ryan's going to be tonight, they'll be used to talking into a mic. They'll have presence. They'll be able to project. And
they'll even be able to crack a joke. Perhaps. And I compare that to bar and bat mitzvah celebrations that were done in the 40s and 50s when we earned the name Bar and Bat Mitzvah Mill, right? When there was a movement to force families to go through the synagogue to get a bar or bat mitzvah, and the real pressure put with the gentrification that happened societally at the same time, a push that boys had to have this, that it was somehow defective if your child didn't have it. That was a combination of things. And
when I was growing up, you very frequently had the guys, but very few
of the
girls.
women. Yeah. In the 1950s, Mordechai Kaplan's daughter was the first one that was publicly recorded as a bat mitzvah. And
wow.
Yeah. So, it's not all that long, And obviously I wasn't there for it, but so it's newer for women to do it, and it was not pushed in the beginning, and very historically it was just a party. Hey, you turned 13, you're responsible because you were just part of the community automatically, and hitting that birthday was when you were called to Torah. So you get a variety of things, right? You get somebody who visits Israel, and an Israeli congregation will call you up to the Torah, and you can get a little certificate from them saying, "Oh, you did bar mitzvah." That's not a real one. Okay, that's being called to Torah. But it's not the unit of learning.
I can get my certificate on the web? Oh.
Well, yeah, you can get anything on the web today. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, "Oh, I'm a rabbi." It's like, yeah, okay, right. Yeah. No. That might work for allowing the state of Florida to allow you to do a wedding, but it's not. Yeah. It's the number of people who have come to me with what we would call the instant rabbi certificates are amazing, both in Tucson and in Port St. Lucie. Just kind of mind-boggling.
Makes a nice gift, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes a nice gift, and I think you now can get it free. But yeah, if you want it in Hebrew, it costs a little more. But and then there's so you might see like some communities will have a child put on tefillin and say, well, that's the bar mitzvah. If they know the blessings over the tefillin, the prayer boxes, they're done. To me, those and the ones where you memorized a little piece, that's making life easy for the teacher and not imparting the things that the ceremony and the ritual are intended to impart. I know that our little congregation, we haven't had that many B'nai Mitzvah yet. It's obviously the number continues to grow, and it'll grow this weekend. But the comments that I hear from members in our congregation is they can see a change in the child on Friday and Saturday. Between the start of the service Friday and the finish Saturday, there's a transformation that occurs. That student is that young person is ready to be part of the community, and there's a metamorphosis that occurs in the event. But they lead, call it 5 hours of service, right? So it's an hour and a half to 2 hours on Friday night, and it's an easy 3 hours on Saturday. If nothing else, they come and tell me my legs hurt when they're done because they stood, and it's like, I kind of know I do this every week. You're not telling me anything I don't know. But yeah, so it is a process, and it's a growing time for parents as well, because parents have to have the strength and the fortitude to work with the child, because it's going to take some cajoling, it's going to take some shoving, it's going to take some gentle nudging, and maybe some not so gentle nudging, because it is the parent's responsibility to see that a child does it. It's not the child's responsibility. That's what the child is saying at the bar bat mitzvah celebration, is that I now know enough to know that I have responsibilities for my own training. But until then, they're a minor. They're not responsible for what they do or don't do. The parents are.
So are these all individual classes, or do you have multiple?
We do both. We do both. We do some joint classes, and we do one-on-ones. There's a lot of one-on-one because the portion that they're going to be reading is different for each child because it's dependent on the week. Now, the notes, that they all go through together. The blessings, they might all go, the pieces that are all the same, they'll go together. When I was working with a group, I had a group up. I was mobbed on the bima. I had kids all around me, and that's just and in our congregation, I've not heard any complaints about. In fact, people usually like seeing the kids up there.
Absolutely.
And previous congregation, I had complaints that you're the rabbi, you shouldn't have kids up there. It's like, well, how are they going to learn? How are they going to learn if they don't stand up there?
The fact that they want to be there after
a while.
Their celebration, right. That is what gives you hope.
Yeah.
Next generation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually ask them to lead services when I'm not in town, with an adult nearby, but they are the ones who know what they're doing, because unfortunately most adults today do not. And knowing and understanding the service, like I said, there's a science and an understanding and some skills involved in reading the congregation. As you know, if you have to read a crowd, You have to read a group to be able to make the spontaneous changes that might be necessary. And what do you do when, the streaming doesn't work, or the TV behind you that's supposed to have all the words doesn't work, or or you open the prayer book and you go, oh, that's not the right prayer. So you have to be able to work on your feet and handle all of those situations. So it's not easy. It ain't easy becoming a bar bat mitzvah, but I have.
But that's why they transform.
That's why they transform, and
they get the self-confidence.
I've never ever had one come up to me afterward and say, "This wasn't worth the effort." I've never had that. Now I've had some that haven't put in as much effort and probably don't get as much out of it, and that, of course, I can't control. Right? It's the old saying: you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it thirsty. Right? The thirst has got to come out of the child, which the kid is going to get from the parents. Right? So the worst thing that a parent can do is the drop off. Here, kid, go to services. I don't allow it for that very reason. They can't drop the kid off and then pick them up at the end. It's like, no, I'm not the babysitter.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's cool, though.
Yeah,
I like that.
And in fact, I often have the parent sitting with the child during the one-on-one. And because they're learning too, and they're able then to reinforce it better during the time that the child is home and practicing. And in some cases, they actually learn quite a bit. Yeah.
In some cases, probably better for the parent.
Yeah. Some of my adult bar and bat mitzvah students have been ones that have been with their child, and then it's infectious, and they decide to do it and do it right. So this has been Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and we're going to give a shout out to Ryan for his bar mitzvah celebration tonight and tomorrow. And the Congregation Eitz Chaim in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Please check us out at www.eitzchaim.org and have a great week. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, WPSL.com, the webcaster to the world, on Alexa and Google Home.